Pope Paul VI was a great leader who brought much-needed change to the Catholic Church in his 15 years as leader. He became Pope in June 1963 and oversaw the last 3 sessions of the Second Vatican Council. Between 63 and 1978, he gave the Church a new sense of direction and energy. He wrote 7 encyclicals, the best known of which was Humanea Vitae, which was somewhat controversial. His birth name was Giovanni Montini, and he worked as a senior Vatican official for most of his life. During the Second World War, he worked to reduce its consequences on millions of displaced people around Europe and the rest of the world. As Pope, he also greatly increased the number of cardinals. He reduced their voting age and thereby reduced the Italian dominance in terms of selecting popes. The net effect of his papacy was to make the Church more democratic and global in its outlook, and he also appointed 3 cardinals who became future popes. Pope John I, Pope John Paul II, and Joseph Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI. If you'd like to see more about those, please subscribe to the channel. So Pope Paul basically had a huge influence on the future of the Church. At this point, just to take a brief look back at his career, Giovanni Montini was 66 years of age when he became Pope, following a long career as a senior Vatican official. He had been a close advisor to 2 popes, actually, Pius XII and John XXIII. Like John III, he was born in the province of Lombardy in North Italy. However, very much unlike John, Montini was from a high-class family of Italian nobility. He entered the seminary in 1916 and was ordained a priest in 1920, just 4 years later at the age of 23. He was a bright student, done a doctorate in canon law, and by his mid-20s he began to work for the Secretariat of State at the Vatican. He worked there for over 3 decades and helped millions of people during the Second World War. So during the late 1930s, Montini was personal assistant to Secretary of State Cardinal Pacelli. Pacelli actually became Pope Pius XII in 1939, and Montini remained one of his closest advisors. During the war years, he made the Pope's summer residence, Castel Gandolfo, and dozens of other church properties available to tens of thousands of displaced people and children. Montini continued as Pius's top advisor, and he was made Archbishop of Milan in 1954. Pope John XXIII made him a cardinal in 1958, just after he became Pope, and Montini became a successor 5 years later as Pope Paul VI. So Montini had worked for most of his career as a senior official at the Vatican, and then as Archbishop of Milan, so that he knew all the Italian cardinals and bishops. He knew them very well, actually. And he also knew that he needed to proceed with the changes he had in mind with great caution. However, he gradually expanded the College of Cardinals from 52 to 134, and he appointed numerous non-Italian cardinals. He also reduced the voting age to 80 years of age at future conclaves. The net effect of these changes was that it greatly reduced the Italian dominance in terms of papal selection. So the Church became more international in its makeup, and 3 subsequent popes, Pope John Paul II, Joseph Ratzinger, and Francis, were all non-Italians, as opposed to the previous situation where they're nearly all Italians. So Paul's influence can also be seen in that 3 of the appointments as cardinals that he made became future popes, that is Pope John Paul I, the II, and also Joseph Ratzinger. So Pope Paul VI oversaw the last 3 sessions of the Vatican Council in 1963, 64, and 65. He had no direct management he had no direct role in running the council, but he was responsible for implementing the decisions later. Vatican II produced 16 documents in total. They were intended to energize and modernize the Church and make it a better communication system. One of the most notable changes was the impact on the Mass. This was changed basically to the use of the local language of the people in the aftermath of the Council. After 1965, the focus was on implementing these changes that were agreed at the Vatican Council. As Pope, he was forced to bring about these changes that were agreed, and he had to try and harmonize the conflicting interests within the Church. In 1965, he set up the Synod of Bishops, which became a permanent feature of the Catholic Church. 4 years later, in 1969, Paul introduced 3 new Eucharistic prayers to the Mass. In the late 60s, he also introduced 3 more changes to the Roman Missal at Mass, and this created something of a strong reaction in that a French archbishop strongly objected to such changes, and he later set up his own organization, the Society of St. Paul X, which promoted a more traditional form of Catholicism. These reactions and such developments highlighted the need for Paul's cautious approach. Paul issued also a number of encyclicals dealing with a range of issues from the Blessed Virgin to the development of the Third World. He had a great devotion to Mary, who he regarded as the ideal Christian. In regard to the Third World, he believed that peace can only be achieved through justice, and that wealthier nations should not exploit weaker ones. He also believed employers should pay employees a fair wage. Paul also maintained that although priestly celibacy was a discipline and not a dogma, it should remain in place within the Church. He also rejected ideas which regarded the Eucharist as simply a symbol and supported the traditional church view in this area as well. However, the greatest criticism basically against Paul was his encyclica Humanea Vitae. Here the Pope maintained that various forms of contraception were not in line with church teaching. He rejected the advice of the commission set up to investigate this matter and issued a decision based on traditional church teaching that conception and new life is in partnership with God and therefore should not be impeded. Pope Paul VI was also anxious to make progress towards Christian unity. He opened one session of the Vatican Council with a special word of welcome for representatives of other Christian communities, and he said that the Catholic Church regrets any part it played in their decision to separate. He subsequently met the Archbishop of Canterbury, Michael Ramsey, on 3 occasions at the Vatican, and they agreed a joint declaration. He invited several other Christian leaders to meet him in the Vatican in subsequent years and frequently met them with the greeting, "My house is also your house." So Pope Paul also set up a commission in terms of interfaith dialogue in 1964. He met with various Jewish and Muslim leaders throughout the late 60s and 70s. Pope Paul believed in spreading the Christian message as the papal name, as his own papal name implies, but actually he also sought to achieve this aim through peace and harmony with other religions. Pope Paul VI also declared 2 people to be doctors of the Church. Both were women, Teresa of Avila and Catherine of Siena. He also beatified 38 people. One of them was Maximilian Kolbe, the great priest who gave his life for a family man in the Auschwitz concentration camp during the Second World War. He also canonized 84 saints, among them the Ugandan martyrs. He also was the last pope to wear the tiara crown, a symbol of political power of the past, as the Church moved into a new era as leader of a broader Christian community. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Just to say in summary, Paul had a huge impact on the Church, really huge. He expanded the College of Cardinals and thereby internationalized the Church and undermined the Italian dominance of papal selection. He wrote 7 encyclicals, 3 of them were about the Blessed Virgin. He also improved relationships with other Christian faiths and with other religions apart from the Christian faith. He put a strong emphasis on justice, both in terms of international relations and also in relation to the trade union movements around the world, emphasizing better wages and working conditions for workers. So thanks again for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.